It is a hypo-responsiveness disorder, right? So you're secreting fine amounts of it. You're just under-responsive to the normal amounts of it. You're actually secreting too much of it. And the cause, by the way, is too much sugar and therefore hypersecretion of insulin. So the way the progression goes is too much sugar, hypersecretion of insulin, hyporesponsiveness to insulin, right? That's how the progression goes. Okay, last hormone on the pancreas is the delta cells produce somatostatin, which you learned elsewhere, but this is a different function of somatostatin. I don't hold you responsible for it in much detail. Somatostatin is necessary to make the pancreas responsive when it's supposed to regulate insulin and glucagon. So somatostatin actually tells you when to stop secreting insulin and glucagon, but you're not responsible for a feedback loop for that one because it's hard to understand. So it just has to be normal for the other two to be normal. Okay, chemical class of hormones. All pancreatic hormones are peptides. Okay, so you guys can do those, and you guys can do those feedback mechanisms, right? Okay, so last organs are the gonads. Do I need to ask you where your gonads are? No, I don't. Okay. All right. So first thing that you need to know is that the testes and the ovaries are, of course, gonads in the two genders. But you started out as gender indeterminate, right? You started out until about 6 or 7 weeks. Everybody had the same set of gonads. And the testes and the ovaries are homologous structures. Do you know that term? It means they developed from the same embryonic and the same evolutionary structure. So you won't be at all surprised that they function really similarly, the testes and the ovaries. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the male first, and then we'll talk about the female. And then we'll also talk about how you got to be male or female, and what can go wrong with that. So first thing is, let's talk about males. So the gonads in the males are, of course, the testes. They started out up in the abdominal cavity, and then about 6 or 7 weeks post-implantation, a couple of switches got flipped, and I'll tell you about the switches in just a second. And that made them differentiate into testes and then start to fall through the inguinal canal, ultimately ending up as testes in the scrotum. Okay, so the testes, their primary hormonal job is to secrete the group of hormones that are collectively called androgens. So let me just remind you that you've learned androgens before. Remember, these are the androgens, the blue ones, right? Yeah? And these two were the ones that were secreted by the adrenal cortex, and they're kind of weak sauce, and women secrete those as well. And these three, there's some overlap, right? These three are secreted by the testes. These two are the big ones. Those are the two that have the highest affinity for the receptors, which is DHT, dihydrotestosterone, and testosterone. Everybody good with that? Okay, dihydrotestosterone and testosterone. So males secrete a lot of those. So what do? Well, there's two different instances in which you are developing as a male, and we'll talk about this again in just a second. There's about 6, 7 weeks post-implantation, so you're like 8 weeks pregnant. You have no way of knowing what gender a baby is going to be at 8 weeks pregnant because it doesn't really have one yet, okay? Unless you could test it hormonally or not even hormonally, chromosomally. So you've got an XX fertilization or an XY. This one's going to be an XY fertilization. And it's implanted, and you fast forward to 6, 7 weeks post-implantation. And so what is going to happen is there's a set of switches that get flipped, and then what happens is the testes start moving down from the abdominal cavity into the scrotum. The clitoris, protoclitoris, starts developing into a penis, right? And then you basically just put all the basic anatomy in place for a baby boy, and then he's born, and he looks like a boy, and you name him Bob. Okay, so Bob is born, and you don't look around at the internal stuff, right? And then pretty much nothing really happens from about 6, 7 weeks post-implantation until puberty. So meaning that little kids, they don't really have any appreciable amounts of estrogen or progesterone or testosterone. They don't really have, like, they're just like kids, right? They're just like a kid. When you hit puberty, what will happen is GnRH will turn on again, and GnRH will make you start the production of testosterone and eventually spermatogenesis, and we'll talk about that in just a second. What else do the androgens do? The androgens are responsible for the development of secondary sex characteristics. The primary ones, we're just getting everything in place. The secondary ones are bone growth and muscle mass growth and changes in the larynx and vocal cords, which makes your voice drops. Increase in muscle mass, axillary hair growth, facial hair growth, pubic hair growth, all of that increase in size of the genitalia. So that's all secondary sex characteristics. Just watch a little boy go through puberty and you can tell like what's the secondary sex characteristics. But in addition, androgens are responsible for sex drive in both genders. So you are going to see sex drive come on board right then. Okay, so in addition, they are also responsible for spermatogenesis. So what I want to do is I want to draw the feedback loop for the production of androgens and spermatogenesis. So if I want to ultimately cause production of androgens, including testosterone, what organ do I start with? Hypothalamus. Okay, so let's start with the hypothalamus. Ready? And hypothalamus produces what relevant hormone to the testosterone story? GnRH. Okay, and then GnRH, there are actually two different places we're going to be interested in going to. Well, GnRH is going to go to the anterior pituitary, and then the anterior pituitary is going to release two different hormones. Let me show you a little bit about the testes real quick. Okay, so I don't know how much of the testicular anatomy you actually covered ever, so let me just tell you a little bit about the testes. The testes have two major jobs. One of them is to produce hormones, androgens, including testosterone, and the other one is spermatogenesis, right? Okay, so the seminiferous tubules are these guys right here, and if you look at a cross-section of one of those, what those do is spermatogenesis from the outside to the inside, and then eventually all of that sperm is going to make it up into the vas deferens and get ejaculated. Good? Okay, but that's not what we're interested in right now. What we're interested in right now is hormone production. So if you do a cross-section of those tubes, you see the cells that are between them, called the Leydig cells in blue right there? Those cells are the ones that do spermatogenesis. So if I want to cause spermatogenesis, specifically, I am going to do which hormone is responsible for causing androgen, testosterone secretion? LH, luteinizing hormone, right? And luteinizing hormone is going to go to those purple or blue cells, right? And they're specifically the testes with the Leydig. They're also sometimes called interstitial cells, Leydig cells. I won't ask you Leydig cells, but that's where it is. And then in response, those cells are going to produce androgens, including testosterone and DHT. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so let's say this is an adult male. How the hell do we keep him from being such a roid rager that nobody wants to hang out with him? And he's just humping everything. How do you keep from making too many androgens? What is the feedback mechanism? No, LH isn't what feeds back. What is it? The androgens themselves. Feedback. What is special about them that makes them able to feed back both places? Yeah. If you don't think testosterone affects your brain, you have like not been around a dude ever. Right? Okay. So testosterone does affect your brain. It goes straight through the blood-brain barrier. Okay. In addition to going to hypothalamus, it goes to a whole bunch of other places as well. Okay. So that's how you know that you have enough androgens. Androgens vary pretty dramatically. In adult male, they vary from about 200 something per deciliter, I can't remember what the unit is, to 1,000. Okay? So if you have a male that gets well above 1,000, you've probably met one before. Super testosterone-y dude, super testosterone dude, right? You probably didn't like hanging out with him very much. So here's androgens. Androgens are responsible for sex drive and drive. Then let's tell the other part of the story, because that's not all the testes do. The testes will also do spermatogenesis, right? And specifically, what hormone is going to drive spermatogenesis from the anterior pituitary? FSH. And it's going to go to the testes, but different cells. Specifically, the seminiferous tubule cells, tubules. And then what that is going to do is cause spermatogenesis. And you're going to make spermatozoa, right? Okay, so here's a question for you. How the hell do you know when you made enough sperm? It doesn't swim back, right? Nobody gave permission for that, did they? Swim back through your bloodstream to tell your anterior pituitary? No. So spermatogenesis, whenever a male does spermatogenesis, he makes this hormone that says I just did spermatogenesis called inhibin. And inhibin just shuts down the production of FSH.
So what is it? Because it inhibits it, that's why they call it.
Yeah, and the same one in females you do with oogenesis. So males make up to 350 million sperm per day. So when they do that, they're making inhibin. So on a relatively regular basis, they're making inhibin. And if a male ejaculates, right, then his inhibin levels go down, and you wait for the sperm levels to come back up, right? And when the sperm levels come back up, the inhibin is released again, right? Does that make sense? So what happens if a male never ejaculates? Somebody always asks, well, like, is it really bad for you to never ejaculate? You'll be fine. Otherwise, all Catholic priests who were doing it, like they said they were doing it, and all Mormon missionaries would be like in a lot of trouble. If you just reabsorb the sperm, that's all that happens. It doesn't get ejaculated. It's not problematic. It's slightly better for your prostate to ejaculate regularly, though. You can tell your wife I said that, although you don't really need her. I mean, honestly. It's an independent process, right? Okay, so because androgens tend to make you build bone mass and muscle mass, androgens are considered anabolic steroids, yes? Which steroid did we look at before that was considered a catabolic steroid? That makes you break down tissue, including muscle.
Is it cortisol?
Yeah, it's cortisol. Yeah, cortisol is a catabolic steroid. This one's an anabolic steroid. So, in just a minute, we'll talk about abusing steroids in just a second. But before we do that, so we've got inhibin, yes? It says, can you reconstruct the chain of hormones? And you can. So let's talk about one other one. I just want to briefly, I don't usually test over this, but I do think it's worth talking about. I want to talk about how you got to be male or female. You ready? Okay. The way that you got to be male or female is that in humans, of course, we are XX female and XY male. That's typically how it occurs. But the default anatomical gender in humans is female. Meaning that if you don't do anything to a developing baby, if you don't change anything, then the external anatomy will look female. Okay? So how do you get to be a male? The way that you get to be a male is you've got a Y chromosome, which of course is present in males and absent in females, right? You guys with me? So this is present in males, and there is a gene on the Y chromosome that actually starts those gonads into developing as testes instead of ovaries, okay? So you don't have it over here, which means it's just going to continue the path it was down, which is to develop as an ovary. And then once you turn the testes part on, they will start to produce a fetal version of testosterone, okay? And then that will continue the development of the male ducts. And the male ducts, by which I mean, okay, all of us started out with two sets of ducts. The first one, these are fallopian tubes, and that's a uterus. These are called the Mullerian ducts, and if you continue the development of those, you'll have the internal reproductive tract of a female. But you also started out with another set of ducts, and this set of ducts, these are vas deferens, and this is like the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland and that kind of stuff. So you started out with both of them. In order to become a male, what you need to do is you need to support the development of this one with testosterone, but you also, and this is super important, on the Y chromosome is a gene for Mullerian inhibiting hormone that causes degeneration of the female ducts. Okay? So in a normal male, normal adult male, you have to flip two switches to get him to develop that way, right? You flip MIH or MIS, and it causes degeneration of the female ducts. And then you have to flip on testosterone to allow complete formation of the male ducts. Does that make sense? Okay, so in females, please note that the development of a female is just the absence of the SRY gene and the absence of testosterone. It's not even the presence of estrogen. So the default anatomical gender in humans is female, right? You will continue as a female. So let's talk about that in the context of a couple of things that can go wrong. So Mullerian inhibiting hormone, or MIS, I don't know what the S stands for here, they use MIS. So males have that, and then they have inhibin. So let's talk about when that goes wrong. So let's talk about androgen insensitivity, and then we'll talk about the other ones. Okay, so I want to teach you a form that is physiologically well known, one way in which a person can become transgender. Okay? Transgender means that there is your gender identification, there's your chromosome complement, there's your hormonal environment, and then there is your anatomy. And some people say there's a fifth one, but I don't know how to talk about that one because that one's psychology, and that's not my realm, okay? So if any of those don't agree, that is one way that a person could describe being transgender. So here's one that physiologically exists, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence for it, okay? So there is a disorder that is called androgen insensitivity, and it's a genetic disorder. And this genetic disorder is when you have an XY fertilization implantation, but the testosterone or androgen receptors are non-functional. The shape of them does not actually respond to testosterone, okay? So stick with me, okay? So I want you to try to figure out what this kid is going to be. Of course, this mutation occurred before fertilization, okay? And the testosterone or androgen receptors don't work. So this is called androgen insensitivity. So what we have is this story right here, right? We've got an XY zygote. We do have the presence of the SRY gene. That one's not the problem, okay? So what's going to happen is the testes are going to start to produce testosterone, and they do, yes? But the problem is you don't respond to testosterone. And since you don't respond to testosterone, you are not going to continue the development of the male reproductive tract, meaning those things are not going to fully differentiate into testes and drop through the inguinal canal, and you are not going to have the complete development of the vas deferens and all of the glandular structures of the male reproductive tract, right? So what's going to happen internally is you are going to have something that did not completely develop as a male. As a matter of fact, it doesn't develop much as a male at all, okay? And then the interesting thing is that you do have this, because that's not the problem. It was testosterone receptors that are the problem. So you do produce MIH or MIS, and you degenerate the internal reproductive tract of the female. So you degenerate the fallopian tubes and the uterus, okay? So now what we have is we have a baby that is born, and this baby is going to be born, and they're going to look female, because that's the default anatomical gender in humans. Nobody's going to go looking, but if they did, they would find that there was a blind vagina with no uterus up there. You guys with me? They've got gonads up there that are not quite ovaries or testes. Okay, so she's born. Everybody started out with a structure that looked like a clitoris. Everybody started out with labia majora and labia minora. What happens in males is the clitoris develops mostly into a penis, the labia majora develop into scrotum, the labia minora become the shaft, the skin of the shaft of the penis. Are we okay with that? Okay, so this little girl is born. She's born, you name her Susie. Whatever. Again, really hardly any difference between genders from little boys and little girls. They're just like kids, man. They might gender identify as one thing or the other because it seems as if, and this one's an interesting one, it seems as if that spike of testosterone that happens at 6 to 7 weeks is also responsible for your gender identification. Now that is one that needs a lot more evidence, but what happens is, what if her receptors didn't work on her brain either? Then what is her gender going to identify as? Female. Yeah. So she's born, and most of these little girls, by the way, do gender identify as female. They have no greater incidence of homosexuality, if that is a question, than the population at large, which is arguably 10% or more. Although my mother-in-law insists she's never met a gay person. Okay. I'm like, that might be the vibe you're putting off. She swears to me that gay people did not exist when she was a kid. She's like, no, there aren't any. I was like, oh my goodness. She's like 65. Okay, so she's born, and fast forward, relatively normal childhood, no problem. You don't know about internal reproductive structures. You don't look for them, right? And then she hits 13, 14, 15, and she doesn't start menstruating. However, she does hit puberty, just so you know, because she's going to start producing boatloads of testosterone again. She's going to do it slightly later, like guys do. Guys hit puberty slightly later. But what's the deal? The deal is that all that testosterone, androgens that are not used, get converted into estrogens. And her estrogen receptors are fine. So now what's going to happen is she's going to have a boatload of estrogens. She's going to grow up pretty tall. She's going to have slightly more muscle mass just because of the amount of sex hormones that she has. So she's going to have a pretty fast metabolism, be kind of leggy. She's going to get big breasts because of the level of estrogen that she has. She's going to be a little supermodel. And then at some point she has to go to the doctor and realize that she is not menstruating because she doesn't have a uterus, right? And in addition, she also needs surgery because those undifferentiated gonads have very high rates of cancer. And then after she has surgery, she's going to have to replace estrogen for the rest of her life. However, she is XY, yes? XY with high levels of testosterone her whole life, yes? And there is hardly any way that I could argue that she is a boy, yeah? So this is an instance in which if we have conceptual problems figuring out that anyone could possibly be transgender, this is a physiological example of people who are transgender, right? This is not the only physiological example of people who are transgender. But from my perspective, if education doesn't get you some empathy, you're doing it wrong. So this is androgen insensitivity. And of course they don't pass it on because they're not fertile, yeah? So it's just a random mutation that occurs every once in a while. There have been some famous supermodels that were androgen insensitive.
One just came out.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who just came out.
She just came out.
Why would the androgens be converted to estrogen?
Because of this conversion mechanism. So when you make high levels of it and you're not responding to it, the conversion mechanisms just continue to get converted more and more, and you respond to the estrogens, but you don't respond to the androgens. And guys make a lot of androgens during puberty, a lot of androgens. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To you guys? So anyway, that's androgen insensitivity. That one we've known about for a really long time. This is the one I always think about when people are like, well, we're going to make them, you know, use the bathroom that matches their chromosome. I'm like, what? No, that's craziness. But I can't talk to my mother-in-law about that one either. Okay, so DHEA and anabolic steroid use. Let's talk about that briefly. Okay, steroids. What's happening with steroids? When someone starts shooting up steroids because they want to get really, really massive, right? The problem is that it's super effective because if 1,000 was high for a male, what if you did 2,000 and then worked out? What's going to happen is you are going to have, oh, this is not the right one. You are going to have lots and lots of muscle mass buildup. So like Jose Canseco, did he say that he used, I think he said that he used steroids. But the problem is that you are also going to break your feedback loop, okay? You're going to break your feedback loop by taking in exogenous testosterone, right? It's going to make you aggressive, give you lots of zits, make your muscles super duper big. In addition, do you see why it will break your feedback loop? It will eventually stop you secreting GnRH, and it will stop you secreting FSH and LH. Ultimately, what can happen if you have used this for a long period of time is that it will make your testes shrink up to the size of English peas because they don't really have anything to do. They're like, you're doing all of this for us, right? And you get a lot of aggression problems. You can break it permanently. If you break it permanently, then you're going to be infertile associated with it. So, and then the testicular changes are pretty dramatic. These are rat testes, but this is pre and post anabolic steroid abuse. Do you see what it actually can do to the rat testes? So another way that people do something akin to this is take DHEA, which is sold over the counter, which is like a weaker version, and they think it builds muscle mass. Probably does a little bit, but in adult males, you've got so much of the other stuff anyway, it's probably not super effective. It is kind of hard on your kidneys, though. So anabolic steroid use, you can see why people do it. You can also see why it tends to break the chain. By the way, something other that's really interesting about anabolic steroid use, if you are taking in boatloads of anabolic steroids and you're not taking an estrogen antagonist, you are going to get some boobs on top of those pecs. Can you see why? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You will convert all of those androgens, some of them to estrogens, and you'll get gynecomastia. Go ahead.
I was in treatment with this kid who had he was a BYU football player, and he had
Breast development?
Yeah. And then he had them removed.
Oh.
They were bad. Like, they were like...
This is why you need some education, man. Even if you're going to, like, be a junkie, be a smart junkie so you don't get boobs. I mean, unless you want boobs. There's a better ways to get it, though. Yeah, so you do get gynecomastia. By the way, people who are changing their gender, if you have a female to male person who is transgender and is transitioning, along with the androgen supplements, you're going to have to take estrogen blockers, or else you're going to have that. Does that make sense? Breast development. Yeah? Okay. So that's those. Now let's move on to the ovaries. Okay. So the ovaries are easy because we already did most of it. It's going to be almost exactly the same, only take out testes and put in ovaries. Take out androgens and put in estrogens, and take out spermatogenesis and put in oogenesis, right? So it's primarily how you're going to get to it, because they are the same organ, right? So the regulation mechanism is going to be the same. Okay. Where did I put it? Balls. Lost it. Okay. Did I just have it?
Yeah.
How did this? Okay. So they're going to go to the ovaries. It's different cells in these two, but you don't care what the names are. And let's talk about what happens with LH when it hits the ovaries. What it will do is cause production of estrogens. The biggie estrogen with the highest affinity for the receptor is estradiol. And so estrogens are going to make you develop your secondary sex characteristics. So secondary sex characteristics, breast development, changes of body fat so that you've got less body fat in the middle and more here and here. All of the other brain changes, because estrogen affects your brain just like testosterone does. So all of that occurs. In addition, one of the things that I want to point out to you is that the female reproductive hormones have absolutely nothing to do with sex drive. It is the androgens in both genders that have to do with sex drive. So, although I'd like to talk to the management about this one, you can be fertile and you can get knocked up and you could have had zero sex drive in order for that to occur, right? You do not have to enjoy the process or even want to be part of the process in order to get knocked up. So, estrogens are actually converted androgens. So what really happens, FYI, is the ovaries actually, you make androgens and then you convert them. The ovaries have a whole bunch of conversion enzymes. So even if a female makes androgens, she just converts almost all of them to estrogens. So how do you feed back? Same way, right? Feed back to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. Of course, this is far more cyclical on like a 28-day cycle than males are, right? Just got a longer cyclical period. And then what happens on this side is the female wants to do oogenesis, but same kind of story. She won't do that in the absence of estrogens and FSH. Yeah? Then you do oogenesis. How do you tell when you made an egg and you don't need to make another one until the next cycle? You release inhibin. Inhibin also tells you you're done. But you make inhibin about once every 28 days instead of like almost on a daily basis, like a week. That make sense? So it's the same
like
story.
Like your guys' menstrual cycle.
Menstrual cycle has to do with the next hormone we're going to do, which is progesterone. I mean, it does have to do with this one because estrogen causes progesterone release. Okay, so you guys all right with that? Okay, so it's the same story basically, males and females. So let's talk about a couple of other hormones. So you already got inhibin. One more is that during childbirth, the ovaries also secrete relaxin, and relaxin is cool. Relaxin relaxes all of the connective tissue associations and all of the smooth muscle in your body, and also some of the skeletal muscle, so that you can get a freaking watermelon through that nostril size opening down there. Okay? And when relaxin courses through your blood vessels, what happens is it makes all of your joints feel super loose. Some moms like notice when it happens. It feels like if you threw a ball, your arm would go with it. Like everything's super ragdoll floppy.
How long does that
Okay.
last?
Not very long at all, like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or it can relax.
So if you have an epidural, you wouldn't know?
No, if you have an epidural, you're not going to know at all. I mean, unless you try to throw a ball. So I didn't get any of this, so I don't have this personal experience because I've got a heart problem and I couldn't go into labor. They have to like do a planned C-section, but I want to hear your stories with relaxin. Sounds kind of pleasant. Okay, then let's talk about progesterone briefly. Progesterone is also released from the ovaries. You don't have to do the feedback loop for that one because it's really complicated. But basically, here's what progesterone is. It's the ovaries telling the uterus what to do. And what the ovaries tell the uterus is they tell it when they are either about to ovulate or have just ovulated, and the progesterone level goes up. Because progesterone is pro-gestation. Pro-gestation. So what do you think the uterus should do when you tell it that an egg is about to come? Thicken the lining of the uterus, the endometrium, right? That's what progesterone does. And if progesterone is there, the lining is nice and thick and hospitable for implantation. And implantation physiologically is actually pregnancy. Pregnancy is not fertilization. Your body doesn't know when fertilization occurs. So implantation can potentially occur. If you are pregnant, then progesterone stays high the entire time. It's progestation, right? You hope. It's going to stay high the whole time, okay? So that's what progesterone does. And when you get out of the window in which an implantation could have occurred, so you've got ovulation, and then you've got like almost a week window in which implantation can occur. If it doesn't occur, then the progesterone level drops, and then you menstruate, right? So go ahead.
I was just wondering, does that the progesterone influence like endometriosis?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, endometriosis is very, very sensitive to hormone levels. Yes, extremely sensitive. Okay, so last little tidbit is go ahead.
So birth control pills,
Yes.
does it inhibit progesterone?
There are progesterone-only birth control pills. There are estrogen and progesterone birth control pills, depending on which one you use. Most of them, what they do is they jack with the cycle so that it is not a dependable enough cycle to allow for ovulation, right? They just mess with it so that if you're like, it doesn't let you ovulate. Let's talk about a couple of other forms of birth control. Another form of birth control is the IUD, and what the IUD does is pisses off your uterus so that you don't ever develop a thick endometrial lining. Does that make sense? So even if fertilization could occur, implantation can occur, right? So a lot of people get a little freaked out when they realize that that's what it's doing. It's not preventing fertilization. It's preventing implantation. Although the Mirena, which has hormones that it releases, the Mirena prevents usually ovulation and implantation, but we don't know how much of each it actually does. So let's talk, last little tidbit is let's talk about RU486. So this will give you something to argue with your mother-in-law about. Okay, so RU486 is sold, it's mifepristone, and there are drugs that are this one or like this one that are sold as, depending on your political leaning, you might call it the abortion pill, you might call it the morning after pill, or Plan B. Okay, so this is directly related to this story because what this drug does is a progesterone antagonist. Okay, so it's strange that rape is the least controversial thing I can talk about in this context, but it is. So let's say a person is raped and they go into the hospital within 24 or 36 hours. Implantation does not occur even immediately after fertilization. It's usually 2 to 6 days, sometimes up to 7 days after. So what you have is potentially a fertilization occurred, and you have no way of knowing whether it did occur. Okay? You've got this window of time in between fertilization and implantation. And if at that time you take a progesterone antagonist, what is going to happen to the lining of the uterus? It's going to slough off, so no implantation can occur. Does that make sense? That's how this works. Okay? It's not usually just one pill, it's like a series of pills that you have to do. So from a physiological perspective, just so you know, it is actually a pregnancy preventer. It prevents implantation. Okay? As does an IUD. But one of the reasons that people get all up in arms about it is that sometimes when it's just implanted, if you get it within the first 2-3 days of implantation, it can slough off an implanted one. So that's why they can call it the abortion pill. It's terribly, terribly ineffective at doing that, just so you know. It is really only supposed to be effective. Some of them are effective up to 72 hours. Sometimes you need to do them within 36 hours. But what they're supposed to do is to prevent a pregnancy. Should a fertilization have occurred. So that's what that one does.
So it can, so like if it implants, then you take the morning after pill.
It depends on which one. There are stronger progesterone antagonists and weaker ones. It depends on which one you use. There are a few that can slough off the very earliest days of implantation. Now, can it work into like 6 weeks? No. They're completely ineffective at that point because you've got so much progesterone at that point. There's no way.
We were just talking about that.
all that. I'll do that. You were gonna, I was gonna do that, but at least it's like now, I'm certainly gonna. Well, of course I did.
Great.
Yes, I'm going. Appreciate it.
No, it's really cyclical. It's because of the scarring that causes because of the so, but it's really, really susceptible to hormone changes. Oh, let's look and see what that did.
Yeah, so I think it did, but I wrote it down just in
Okay.
case, so.
Hold on, let me save this real quick.